In this video, we're going to learn about the midpoint formula. So here it is. The midpoint between the points x1, y1, and x2, y2 is given by this formula. So for the first coordinate of the midpoint, we add both of the x coordinates and then divide by 2. And for the second coordinate, we do the same thing but with the y coordinates. So y1 plus y2 over 2. Now, intuitively, each coordinate in the midpoint is just the average of the coordinates of the 2 points. You just add both of them together and divide by 2. And the average of 2 numbers always tells us what's halfway in between the 2 numbers. So the x-coordinate of the midpoint is really the halfway point between the x-coordinates of these 2 points, and we just compute that by adding the x-coordinates and dividing by 2. Same idea for the y-coordinates. Add them, divide by 2 to get the number that's halfway in between y1 and y2. Okay, so let's do some problems. Compute the midpoint between the given points. First of all, let's look at 3, 4, and 5, 2. Let's write down the midpoint over here. So for the x-coordinate of the midpoint, we have to add the x-coordinates of the 2 points and divide by 2. So we'll take 3, then plus the x-coordinate of the other point, so plus 5, and then divide by 2. Then for the y-coordinate, it's the same idea. Take 4, the y-coordinate of that first point, then add 2, the y-coordinate of the second point, and divide by 2. So let's compute what this is. 3 plus 5 is 8, then that's over 2. Likewise, 4 plus 2 is 6, and that's over 2. And we can simplify this further. 8 divided by 2 is just 4, and 6 divided by 2 is just 3. So there we go, that's the midpoint between the given points. Why don't we also plot this on the graph just to gain some geometric intuition? So the x-coordinate is 4, so go over 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the y-coordinate is 3, so go up 1, 2, 3. So there's our midpoint. Our midpoint is 4, 3. And as you can see, the midpoint lies right in the middle of the segment between the given points. And the x-coordinate of the midpoint, which is 4, lies right in between 3 and 5, the x-coordinates of the given points. Likewise, the y-coordinate, 3, lies right in between 2 and 4, the y-coordinates of the given points. Alright, on to the next problem. Find the midpoint between -3, 5, and 2, -3. Same idea, let's just set up our formula. To get the x-coordinate, we just add the x-coordinates of the 2 points. So -3 is the first x-coordinate, and then plus 2, the second x-coordinate, and divide by 2. Then do the same thing for the y's. 5 is the first y-coordinate, and then -3 is the second y-coordinate. Now we can simplify this. -3 plus 2 is just -1, so -1 over 2 is the x-coordinate, and then 5 minus 3 is 2, so we've got 2 over 2 as the y-coordinate. Let's simplify it even more. -1 over 2 is just -1/2, and 2 over 2 is just 1. So that's our midpoint, -1/2, 1. Again, let's plot this on the graph. So go to -1/2, that's halfway to the first tick mark, and then 1 up. So it's right over there. Let's label that -1/2, 1. And does that look right? Yeah, it looks perfectly halfway on the segment between these 2 points. Perfect. Here are some more questions. First of all, find x and y if the midpoint between 1, 2 and xy is given by 5, 0. Alright, so to start this off, why don't we just try to express the midpoint in terms of x and y, and then we can set that point equal to 5, 0 and come up with some equations. Okay, so first of all, take 1, 2 and xy and express the midpoint in terms of x and y. Why don't we color code this to make it a little bit easier to follow? So I want to find the midpoint between 1, 2 will be our first point, and x, y will be our second point. So that is equal to, according to our formula, we just add the x coordinates, so add 1 plus x, and divide that sum by 2, and then same idea for the y coordinates. So add the y coordinate 2, and the y coordinate y, and divide by 2. So there we go, that's our midpoint in terms of x and y. And we know that the midpoint is given by 5, 0. So this point has to be equal to the point 5, 0. So that means each of the components has to be equal. First of all, 1 plus x over 2 has to be equal to 5 because they're both the x components of these 2 points. So that's equal to 5. And also the y components have to be equal. So 2 plus y over 2 has to be equal to 0. Now we can just solve each of these equations to find x and y. Let's solve for x first. So to get rid of this divided by 2, let's just multiply by 2 on both sides. Multiply by 2, that'll cancel with this divided by 2, and then we just have 1 plus x on this side, so 1 plus x is equal to 5 times 2, which is 10. Now we just have to subtract 1 to get x alone. Subtract 1 from both sides, we get x equals 10 minus 1, which is 9. We can do a similar thing for the y equation here. It's over 2, so multiply by 2 on both sides to get rid of that 2 in the denominator. So cancels that out. And then we just have 2 plus y on this side. So 2 plus y equals 0 times 2, which is still just 0. And then subtract 2 from both sides. That cancels out the 2, and we just have y equals 0 minus 2, which is negative 2. So there's our solution. X equals 9, and y equals negative 2. Okay, on to the next problem. Find a and b if the midpoint between the points a plus b, a minus b, and ab is given by 3, 1. Alright, so this is going to be a very similar approach. Let's just express the midpoint in terms of a and b, and then we'll set that equal to the other point, 3, 1, and then we'll get 2 equations that we can solve. Let's jump right into the midpoint formula. So first of all, we want to add the x coordinates and divide by 2. Now the first x coordinate here is a plus b, and the second x coordinate is just a, so a plus b plus a divided by 2. And then the y coordinates, we do the same thing, add them and divide by 2. So the first y coordinate is a minus b, and the second y coordinate is just b. So a minus b plus b. So that's the midpoint in terms of a and b, and we also know that the midpoint is given by 3, 1. So this has to be equal to 3, 1. And we can actually simplify this a little bit. The first component here, a plus b plus a over 2, well, a plus a is just 2a, so 2a, and then plus b, and then that's over 2. And then the second component, a minus b plus b, the minus b plus b cancels, and we just have a over 2. So that midpoint has to be equal to 3, 1 still. And thus we can set up 2 equations. The first one we can get by equating the x components here. So 2a plus b over 2 is equal to 3. And the second equation we can get by equating the y components. So a over 2 is equal to 1. Alright, so this equation has 2 variables in it, so that's not going to be solvable right away. But this equation over here only has a single variable. So why don't we solve this equation for a first, and then we can substitute it back in here to solve for b. Alright, let's do that. So a over 2 equals 1. To get rid of that divided by 2, we just multiply both sides times 2. And what do we get? Well, that cancels out the divided by 2, and we just have a equals 1 times 2, which is 2. And now that we know that a is 2, we can just substitute it into here for a. So 2 times 2 plus b over 2 equals 3. And now we can just solve this for b. So let's simplify it first. 2 times 2 is just 4. So we have 4 plus b over 2 is equal to 3. Now we can just multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of that denominator. We do that, and we have 4 plus b is equal to 3 times 2, which is 6. And then subtract 4 to get b alone, subtract 4 from both sides, and we just have b equals 6 minus 4, which is 2. So our general solution then is a equals 2 and b also equals 2. So now we know how to find the midpoint between two given points. And in the future, we'll continue to learn more about coordinate geometry, such as how to work with polygons in the plane.